Hi friends, it's Terry Stewart, independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator located in Central Maryland in the U.S. Welcome to day 7 of the 12 Days of Christmas and More. So today I have an and more project that I'm going to share with you, and it actually is more about a technique than it is about stamping. So let's jump in. I'm going to turn the camera around now. If you get sick, look away. The camera is moving. And you're going to see my ceiling, my big light, my big head until I can get the camera turned around. Okay, come on, turn around. There we go. Okay, so you see the stamp sets I'm going to be using today are the Dragonfly Garden, and I actually have the punch that coordinates. I'm going to be using that also. And then for our sentiments are coming from the Inspired Thoughts. So I'm working on a Sympathy card today. So the front's going to have with heartfelt sympathy, and then the inside will be sheltering you with love at a time when words fall short. So I think that's an appropriate sentiment. And this is the Dragonfly punch, and we're going to be punching some little dragonflies with this small one. So let me show you my card and talk about the technique. So this is my Sympathy card that I'm going to be showing you. So I see somebody's watching. If you have any questions, please just let me know and I'll keep an eye out over there. But if you're watching on replay, welcome, and I'm glad you're here. So this card, we're going to be stamping with a block. So the background is actually putting ink on a block, spritzing that block, and then stamping onto the paper, and that creates this background. We'll use two colors on one block. We have Soft Seafoam and Pool Party. So once we get our background done, and then it dries, then I'll be stamping this image from the Dragonfly Garden, this floral image over here, and then the greeting from the Inspired Thoughts, and on the inside is the sheltering with love sentiment. So I have done a die cut with the Stylish Shapes dies. I used this larger banner over here, more of a this is a longer rectangle. This is the shorter rectangle, but it's the larger one of the shorter rectangles. Stylish Shapes dies. I tied some ribbon, some white glittered organdy ribbon. And then I punched out some dragonflies using with vellum, just with a scrap of vellum. All right, so let's get to our technique. Let me shift some things away and bring in the block I'll be using and the two inks, Soft Seafoam and Pool Party. So before I start that, let me talk a little bit about the paper. So I have a background here of gray granite, and then this layer is shimmery white, which I don't know if you can tell, but it has a sparkle embedded in the paper on both sides, and because of the way it's manufactured, it has a little bit of a coating which works well if you put water on it. It doesn't buckle like a typical basic white or basic vanilla would. So here's my card kit, and I have a base half sheet of gray granite like I told you. Here's my scrap of vellum, my die cut also from the shimmery white, and then I have two pieces of cardstock, and they are 5 inches by 3 3/4. Let me see if I can do this on the fly. I think it's 9.5 centimeters by 13.9. I'll post the measurements on following this presentation, and I'll confirm those metric measurements. So let's shift this to the side, this to the side. Now I'm starting with my lighter color, my soft sea foam, and I want to ink up just half of this block. Now this is the E block. Yeah, that's E. And I'm going to do about half of it. I'm going to press this on the ink pad, and I want to make sure it's hard to see this soft sea foam, but the more ink you get on this, the better. And you kind of want to make sure that you don't have any gaps, but it's really hard to see because it's so light. And there will be variations depending on how much water, because we're going to spritz this. And now my pool party, I'm doing my darker color, and I'm going to flip it and press it. And this will be easier to see if I get all the ink on there, if I haven't missed any spots. So that looks pretty good. It's, again, this is a light color, so it is difficult to see. And close this. Close my other pad. Ooh, now, there we go. It's a little tight. And then I'm going to bring in my spritzer. Now this is my spritzer. I filled it right from the tap. It's got tap water in it. I'm going to bring in my scrap paper and move my card out of the way, my sample, so I don't get this water everywhere. So the idea is to use this little eye and to spritz over across it, not down on it. And again, watch where that eye, because that's where the water is going to come out. I'm going to spritz it like, say, 3 times across. 1, 2, 3, and then just want to make sure that I have, so this one might have a little bit more water than I anticipated, but it's going to work fine. Bring in my shimmery white, and then I'm going to turn this over and center it on my cardstock, because this is going to be my background and I want it centered. So push it down, and then I'm just gonna push it so the water and ink transfer from the block to the paper, and give it a couple seconds and press. And then once you think it's done the job, you can lift your block up. So you can see that maybe I didn't get so much water here. There was some movement over here where the pool party bled down into the soft sea foam, but that is fine. Now I am going to hold this down with my ink pads just while it dries. So let me shift that off to the side, and we'll let that dry for a couple minutes while we do some other stamping. And then I can just take my chamois, and wash it. So it's water-based, it will come off. So I'm going to use my chamois off to the side and clean that up, clean my block up. All right, so that's done. And now I'm going to bring back my sample, and we can finish up with our stamping. So I'll be using the Memento Tuxedo Black ink to stamp my sentiment. Let's get those over here. So with Heartfelt Sympathy, I'm going to ink that up and stamp in my die cut. So hopefully I can get this straight. I'm not having my head over. Well, it's not the best, but for right now, that's what I'm going to have to go with. If I had my head in the camera, I could probably do a better job. So now we're going to try the Sheltering with Love. Sheltering you with love at a time when words fall short. I think that's just such a beautiful sentiment for a Sympathy card. And then I'll center it towards the top and push that down and give it a couple seconds to transfer. Nice. Okay. So I think our we can do some stamping now on our background. It's a little damp, but I think it's gonna work. It's not too damp. So I'm gonna bring this floral image and my Memento ink back in. And I think it's easier when you have larger stamp. This is a longer stamp, to bring the ink pad to the image and move the ink pad rather than the stamp. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then turn this over. Now I want the stems not to go past the border, so I'm going to bring them in my scrap paper and mask that while I stamp. And I'm going to tilt it slightly to the right, the stamped image. I think that looks good right there. And then push that down, give it a couple seconds to transfer, and a very nice image. And then you can see the stems don't run off the background. And there are some differences. So each background is going to be different depending on how much ink you put on, how much water, but that's what makes it so unique, that you're going to have a different look each time you create a background like this. So I'm going to be using this glittered organdy ribbon. And I'll show you when I'm done here that another same card I did, but I used a different ribbon. The soft seafoam seam binding ribbon that's in the Splendid Day suite, but it has gone missing in my craft room, so I had to improvise and come up with a different ribbon. And I wanted something rather sheer. I didn't want too bulky. I thought about linen thread, but I thought that it needed to be a little bit wider. Linen thread might have been just a little too narrow for what I was asking of it. That it would get lost on the background rather than enhance the background. And then I'm just going to trim this up. There we go. Now we can adhere it to our card front. So this is my basic, my gray granite. Let me bring in my bone folder. So even though this is scored, I like to crisp up my scored so my card really lays flat. And with my liquid, one other step I wanted to do before we get there. So if you noticed, I have colored the centers of these daisies, and to do that I have my Daffodil Delight, the dark Daffodil Delight blends marker. So this is an alcohol based marker, and I'm going to use the bullet end to color in these daisy centers. I think it's just a little touch that adds a little something. So there's a little bit of color there, and now we can adhere this. And I'm going to be using liquid glue, and I'm going to be using a lot because this paper is curled a little bit, and I want to really flatten it out. So I want to make sure I get my glue all close to the edges and all corners so I can adhere it flat. And I'll put some right on that ribbon too, and more around the card base. Okay, we'll turn this over, make sure we have our opening going the right way, because I have sealed, put card fronts on going the wrong way. I'm sure everybody else has experienced that. A moment of like, oh, what have I done? So once that's centered, press it down and really hold those corners so it lays flat on the card front. So I'm happy with that. Put our inside in. So this one doesn't curl because it hasn't been spritzed on, so I don't need as much glue to hold it down, adhere it down. And I made these the same size, so the border on the front is echoed on the interior of the card. So you kind of carry some of that elements from the front to the inside. All right, and for our heartfelt sympathy, I'm going to be using dimensionals. I love dimensionals. I love using them on all my projects. I think it just adds a bit of interest to have things that raise up a little bit and draw your attention. Maybe it's a little bit of a shadow. It's just a nice artistic element. Easy to add with these dimensionals. And then we have covers. I have to remove the covers so we can get that adhesive showing, and then we can adhere it right where we want. So with heartfelt sympathy, it's going to go down to the right and near that ribbon. Okay. So I told you that I was going to use the punch, and I want to add a few of these little dragonflies punches. So I'm going to do 2 on the front and then 2 on the inside. I've already punched several of them and had them pre-punched, so you didn't have to watch me punch everything. And I'll put one kind of flying up to the left and then one flying over to the right. And to adhere these, I'm going to take my liquid glue, and now usually adhesives show through, so I'm just going to put a narrow little bead down the center of the body, and it will be, when it dries you'll see that little bit of darker, but I think it kind of emphasizes the body, and then the leaves, the wings are left free, so they kind of hover above the front of the card. Just thought that was a neat little element. And then I want to bring that on the inside and put 2. So we'll have one going to the left and one going to the right. And the same idea of just using that little bit of adhesive down the center of the body to adhere them, and letting the wings lightly float above the cardstock. So let's get this one down, and then I can show you a sample I used with the seam binding ribbon, and you can tell me which one you prefer. So there is my card with the technique of stamping with the block to create a background. So that's my card, and I was going to show you the other sample. So this card is the same one. You can see we had a variation in color, and depending on how much water you use, you can get these different patterns. So each one will be unique. But this one has that seam binding, I think soft seafoam seam binding. So I don't know which version you prefer. Looking at them, this one's paler, so I think the organdy ribbon looks nicer. This one's darker, so the seafoam seam binding might be preferred. But anyway, there is my card. So I'm so glad. Oh, hi Susan, thanks for joining. And again, if you're watching on replay, welcome. So that is my day 7, and there was no swans a swimming in this one, unless you want to say that they were off in a pond somewhere out of view on this card front. Tomorrow is 8 Lords a Leaping. I'm not quite sure what you'll be seeing. Probably not those on the stamping. But please join us tomorrow for another day of projects. So again, if you have any questions or want to place an order, get with the demonstrator who invited you. And I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, hit her up. So thank you so much for being here and watching my presentation. And remember, stamping is fun. Bye.